Dude.
Well, didn't you say you could Photoshop stuff?
Yeah, can you please Photoshop my arms?
I think they look decent.
No, I used to be in shape.
They look good.
No, I was in a motorcycle accident, and then I dislocated my shoulder.
Ooh.
It kicked me. I was doing intermittent fasting. I had a six-pack. And I don't know what happened to me, but it was like a bad dislocation. It chipped a piece of the bone, and then there's still a little piece of the bone in there, I think. And so it took me a while to get better, and there's still a little pain. I think that it's actually caused some, like, I don't know, subconscious stress where the muscle is.
Yeah.
And because this side is always weird, it still kind of hurts a little bit. So, and then I got kicked off my whole thing, and now I'm just like a skinny twig.
You can always get it back.
I'm going to work on it now after seeing you.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to, and this is episode number 6, $1 Million Groove Podcast. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us, Ben. Ben is the director of Mayhem Mission, and I'm just going to let you introduce what it is that you guys do. And thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, so Mayhem Mission is basically the nonprofit arm of CrossFit Mayhem.
Okay.
So if anybody's familiar with CrossFit, they're probably familiar with CrossFit Mayhem. It's kind of like the mecca of CrossFit. It's founded by, you could call him the Michael Jordan of CrossFit, Rich Froning, and then another guy, Brian Nelson, who was working for Rich. And Rich was already doing some things like fundraisers for an at-risk youth organization in Cookeville, where he lives. Brian was doing a lot of overseas missions, and they were kind of responding to some natural disasters, that were like a tornado ripped through Cookeville, and Mayhem wanted to respond to that. And so Brian really suggested, hey, why don't we start a 501c3? We can formalize this and grow it and have even more impact.
Nice.
And Rich was like, yeah, let's do it. So they founded that one in 2020. And they had an initial director for about a year. She stepped away. Brian was trying to oversee it with his 2 other jobs. That wasn't working out well. And so they called me and asked me if I wanted to take over and lead the charge. And I prayed for about a month because I was already working 2 jobs. Just wasn't sure if it was going to be doable time-wise. And after some more conversations, a lot of prayer, it was like, you know what? Let's do it. I want to try this. And I've been directing for about 2 years. Mayhem Mission has 4 pillars, so we have kind of 4 areas of focus. The first one is human trafficking, then clean water, the unreached, and at-risk youth.
Okay.
So we do fundraisers around those pillars, and we do a lot of mission work as well. And essentially, kind of from a 30,000-foot view, we just want to mobilize people in the faith and fitness world to action.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
I love that. And you guys have, I was looking at your calendar. You guys have some, what's your next location that you guys are hitting?
Next month? Yeah, so it's July right now.
Yeah.
This coming month in August, we have a team going to Peru.
That's right.
And Brian Nelson, the co-founder who I mentioned, he's been doing that for a while now. So he is leading that trip. That's an annual thing where they really have a lot of investment in that local community, including a couple of local CrossFit gyms down there, which is a lot of fun. That's a component that we try to tie into as many trips as possible, is connecting to a local gym, internationally, and kind of coming behind them in their efforts locally, wherever they are.
Yeah.
So they also, on that trip, it's kind of interesting, they take a trek into the Amazon jungle, literally like in no man's land.
Oh, nice.
And deliver medical supplies and even bring the gospel. Last year, they baptized a whole bunch of people.
Oh, cool.
When they went into the jungle last year. Yeah. So
please, can you take Joe next? I want to see a documentary of Joe in the jungle, walking with a backpack, fighting off
it's not
bat-sized hornets.
I know, man.
I'm confident he can handle it, but I'm going to tell you, it's not for the faint of heart. There's even if you're a professional CrossFitter, you got to have some mental toughness,
for
right?
Sure, yeah.
There was I'm not going to name him. There was a professional CrossFitter who went last year into the jungle, who came out and said, "I'm never going back there," and
wow.
they're not going back to Peru. So it's not for the faint of heart.
Man, have you been?
I haven't been to Peru.
Okay, I haven't been to Peru. Okay,
I've been on 2 mission trips in my whole life. The first one was in October to Nicaragua.
Okay. I saw the video on that. You guys gave away Reeboks. Is that correct?
Oh, Nobles.
Nobles. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then my second one was just this past May. We went to Mexico, Ensenada.
Oh,
not too far from here.
Okay.
So. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Peru is next, and then shortly after that, meaning about a week after, We have a team going to Southeast Asia, to a country that I can't even specify because it's, dangerous, basically,
Really?
for missionaries.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but it's really exciting. There's 2 local CrossFit gyms there that are going to be part of that trip.
Now, do you guys go with security, or do you guys have a security detail with you when you go? Or do you just...
No.
Okay.
So the individual that's leading the trip is, lives and resides in that area.
So he knows where not to go.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you find that people are inviting when you're coming to, or when you're going to, with the gospel? Do you find that they're inviting, or how do you open that relationship with them? How do you get them at least, or get them curious if it's something that they've never thought about? How do you initiate that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, we partner with a lot of gyms and people and organizations that have a presence already in the community. And the whole idea, you could call it fitness as missions, right?
Right.
Similar to, business as missions. So that's been going on for a long time. Recently, people have discovered that, man, if you open a gym in an area, it is such an organic and quick and beautiful way to build community and do that quickly and build relationships and trust. And once that's established, then, people obviously are much more receptive to the gospel message.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Mind, body, spirit, like
that's
once you get your body right, things seem to click into place. Whenever I find myself slipping on like the working out, which I have been, it's the mood. I don't know. It's such an important part of your mental health too. Physically working out. Joe.
Yeah, I think I've told him this, but I tell my wife all the time that like the first step to like trying to like accomplish goals or whatever, I feel like is your eating. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like what you eat, and then what you do next is like working out, and then obviously prayer and all those things, right? And then that's when it's like everything starts to fall into place. But if you backtrack, it's kind of like whatever you put in your mouth first is the first thing to. It's kind of like lead you either down this bad road or this good road. But I feel like there is definitely a connection there when people.
It's so foundational. Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of people, regardless of what their goal is, a lot of it, hey, I want to lose weight, I want to cut body fat or whatever, they'll look at their working out as like the central piece of that. But really, it goes back to nutrition first and foremost. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
How did you, I'm kind of curious, like, have you always been a person of faith? or did you fall into it? Or how did you find your way into this position? And you said you prayed for about a month before you decided to like, how did you fall into this, how did you find your faith? I guess I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was raised in a Christian home.
Okay.
In a private school.
Okay.
Going to church every Sunday, twice a Sunday.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I was talking to Joseph about the Detroit Lions earlier. So it was always a little bit of a buzzkill for me growing up because this was the Barry Sanders era.
Oh, man.
Right?
That's my guy.
Even though the Lions weren't winning, even though they weren't winning a whole lot, there was like 1 or 2 years where they did well with him. But it was still exciting to watch him, just period, right?
Yeah.
So I would spend most of my Sundays in church, and I would even have to miss Lions games and stuff like that because I was on the junior choir, and had to practice that before the evening service. And, had Sunday school and the regular service in the morning, and so that was kind of my childhood where I had, I was very much indoctrinated. Like I knew a lot of scripture, I knew the gospel message, but I will say. Jesus was my savior, but not necessarily the Lord of my life. Even growing up as a young man and getting to high school, my parents got divorced. I hit a rough patch. I had a lot of aspirations as an athlete, especially in basketball, and those kind of got dashed. And I sort of threw in the towel with a lot of things and said, I'm just going to have fun. And I did that for a few years and didn't walk away from my faith, but certainly engaged in a lot of, sinful behavior and stuff that did not bring me closer to God. I was kind of heading in a different direction. And then my freshman year of college, I just went to a small school called Calvin College in my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I met a guy who had a big impact on me. He was passionate about his faith. He was a ton of fun to hang out with, and we just connected. And he really encouraged me to explore a deeper, relationship with God, and encouraged me to look into being like a camp counselor. He had done that. It had a big impact on him. And he said, I think you'd be good at that. It'd be a great experience for you. So I did that in Santa Cruz, California. And I was going from scratch. I didn't know anybody. I had interviewed with this organization who had visited Calvin College when I was there, and I liked the photos that they displayed. I was like, oh, that looks like a pretty cool spot, you know?
Yeah.
I was ready to just, get out of Dodge. So it was a beautiful experience, man. That summer really was life-changing for me in terms of my faith.
Yeah.
I really grew, got away from a lot of stuff that was kind of dragging me down, and experienced, like, even just reading scripture, like the words started to leap off the pages and it came alive. And this book that I had read basically my whole life, and had it read to me often, it never came alive until like that point in my life when I really decided to commit my life to Christ.
Yeah.
So
it's almost like you have to invite it, even for people that are not of the Christian faith. There's so much wisdom in the Bible if you were to read that. If you were to follow what it says, your life will be more wholesome and better. It's just like even if you didn't subscribe to the belief part of it, I'd always suggest, because that's like also another way to like introduce people to it, not to be so pushy with them.
Tucker Carlson just said what you just said.
Really?
This week it was on X. I think he did some podcast, but he literally said,
really?
Yeah, because he said, I wasn't raised in a Christian family. I didn't know anything about the Bible, but he said there were all these different things that were being introduced to me. So I just one day said, hey, I'm going to sit down and just read the Bible. And he said he realized that, man, there's a lot of good stuff here.
Yeah. it's like it's a roadmap, really.
Yeah.
Because, there are challenges today, especially today. Everything seems so chaotic today. Almost seems like we're in some spiritual battle. I find myself looking that way instead of looking to the news or looking to TikTok for answers, or like whatever. But
I love what you said. Can I just?
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think if you do sit down and read the Bible, you see that there's so many components and how they're interwoven so beautifully. But there's a lot of narrative, right? Like the whole thing is basically a big narrative, but there's also a lot of just practical wisdom in there. When you look at like the wisdom books, like Psalms and Proverbs and the story of Job. So it's really cool. Are you guys familiar with Joseph Campbell, who has The Hero's Journey?
Yes.
He kind of has studied a lot of basically stories, right? From ancient stories all the way to modern day movies and everything. And he coined this phrase or this concept of the hero's journey. And you see that a lot even throughout scripture. Just the hero of the story kind of goes through these different trials, tribulations, refining this and that. And it's just so cool that you see that stuff first and foremost, like in all these biblical stories. So there's some, practical stuff you can take away from that, practical stuff you can take away from the wisdom books that are there. And I can see how somebody could pick it up and be like, hey man, this is pretty cool stuff.
Good stuff, yeah.
It's almost, sometimes I feel that someone that didn't grow up in a Christian household and just had it fed to them their entire life, sometimes someone coming to it on their own volition might actually take more from it because they're reading it without any type of bias. They're taking it and they're open to it in a different type of way.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's this, I didn't make this up, but there was I can't remember who said it, but they said, if you pray for wisdom, you're going to be put in difficult situations. Like people think that God is a genie, and we've talked about this, but like if you pray for stoicism, there's going to be moments, or you pray for strength, there's going to be moments where you're going to have to find it in yourself. Like maybe you'll be presented with something that is going to make you find your strength. Joe just went through our first episode, the entire way that we opened up the $1 million. He was just coming off literal deathbed. Doctors were telling him he was going, and I don't want to tell your story, but
I already told him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doctors were telling me you're going to need a heart transplant. If you need that, what was the life expectancy after a heart transplant?
It was like 10 years or so.
10 years?
10 to 13 years or so you could live.
And you prayed a lot. You asked for, I don't know if you asked for signs, you asked for, guidance. People started showing up in your life randomly, telling you things that were almost like it was an angel.
Prophetic.
Angel being sent to you.
I mean,
very,
it was really weird.
No kidding.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Very weird. And you decided to trust in the messages you were receiving.
Yeah.
And you look at you now, like you're like back on track, no heart transplant. I mean, it's stuff like that. That's really,
yeah, like,
really interesting.
Yeah, so like if people were around me who didn't believe, like, maybe they had a relationship with God or they didn't really, I'm sure now they're like, yeah, there's something just by that story, alone. And yeah, man, it was a weird. I've had prophetic words or things spoken to me before, but not not 3 in 1 week. Yeah, it was weird.
That's intense.
It was very intense, and it was like it was coming out of nowhere. It wasn't like from people that you knew. It wasn't like you got something from your mom or from grandma or something like that.
Can you tell the story when you were in the parking lot and this random woman came up to you, or was it a?
Yeah, so I have like 3. So the first one was it was like last July. Okay, so I was like in the middle of it all, and I couldn't breathe, so my sister was rushing me to the hospital. And I got to the hospital, and there were these group of Christians outside praying for this old lady in front of the hospital, in front of the entrance. And I noticed it as I was getting out of the car, but I really wasn't paying much attention because I was focused on trying to breathe, but I couldn't walk to the door. So my sister had to go inside the hospital to get a wheelchair to bring it out to wheel me inside. And as I'm waiting, they stop praying and walk over to me, and the one of the pastors says, "Hey man, we noticed you walking up." He said, "What are you coming to the hospital for?" And I told him I can't breathe. He's like, what's going on? What's been going on? I said, well, I was diagnosed with heart failure, and I have swelling in my body. I can't breathe. There's like a lot of fluid in my stomach. He's like, okay, do you mind if we pray for you? And I said, yeah, that's cool, man. You can pray for me. He's like, cool. So he brings his whole crew over, and the pastor comes over, and he's like, hey man, do you believe in Jesus? I said, absolutely. I was like, I'm a Christian. He's like, cool, man. Do you believe the Lord can heal you? And I said, absolutely. And before he prayed for me, he looked at me. He said, hey, man, you're actually already healed. He said, there's a spirit of infirmity that's, he said, the doctors have been talking to you for over a year now, and you've been struggling and suffering with this. And he said, you're already healed, man. He said, the problem is the doctors just can't figure out what's going on.
And that was the truth, by the way,
that was
right?
the truth, yeah. And so the whole year,
it's like crazy.
The whole year, the doctors didn't know where we're going. They're like, bro, you're perfectly healthy. They were like, your heart is just weak. We don't know what's going on. And he's like, you haven't done any drugs. You're not, you're not smoking. You're not,
For people that might not know, what is it? What is a spirit of infirmity?
It's a spiritual thing. It's like an attack on the body. Or not on the body, but it could be anywhere. It's like it's a spiritual attack, basically.
Okay.
And yeah, and so and my dad had told me that the first time it started, and I was like, all right, Dad.
It kind of sounds crazy.
It sounds super crazy, right? But this is the first moment. So they prayed for me, and he told me, he said, you're going to walk into the hospital after I'm done praying. He said the doctors are again not going to know what's going on. He said, you think that you're going to stay here tonight, but you're going to end up going home. And I was like, okay. And I knew for sure I was going to end up staying because it was bad. Like my ankles were swollen. And I was like, okay. I walk into the hospital, and sure enough, my body starts to release the fluid because I had to go to the bathroom like 100 times. And by the time I see the doctor's like, well, your heart looks okay. You look fine. He's like, how do you feel? I was like, I feel good, man. I mean, I'm releasing a lot of fluid right now. He's like, okay. He's like, well, just sit here for 30 more minutes. And he's like, you're going to go home tonight. And I was like, what? And I ended up going home. So that was 1. 2, I get to the hospital, this is like October now. I get to the hospital, and this time it was bad. And the doctor's was like, yeah, man, your heart's really weak, man. We're going to send you to UCLA. It's probably going to be a procedure. And I said, okay. And at this point, I'm terrified because I don't know what's going on. I've never been in this situation before. And the second situation was my sister went to this day spa that she liked in the Inland Empire, and she likes to do these salt baths where you like go chill and just sit in this room full of salt. I guess it helps detoxify the body or whatever. So she does this, and it's her and another lady, and this older lady is in there, and she doesn't know the lady. Normally there's like 5 or 10 people in there, and you're chilling. It's kind of like a beach thing. And it's just her and this lady, and they're laying down, and of course they have small talk, and the lady's like, somehow they got on the conversation about me, My sister's like, yeah, my brother's at in Upland. He's at San Antonio Hospital. He's not doing well. He has he's struggling with heart failure. And so the lady, of course, says, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'll be praying for your brother. And so they proceed to go and talk about something else. And they lay down, and, they're in there for 45 minutes. The lady passes out. She goes to sleep. And so she tells my sister to lay on the salt this time, because normally there's like lawn chairs. She says, lay on the salt, it helps the body. So my sister lays on the salt with her. They're laying there for 45 minutes. She said the lady's like snoring. I mean, she's out, bro, out cold, right? And 45 minutes is up. The lady wakes up and she says, your brother's 6'3". He's like 200 pounds, 200 pounds or so. And he's on the 3rd floor at San Antonio Hospital in the ICU. She said, while I was sleeping, the Lord told me to tell you that your brother's going to be okay, that he's already healed. She said, so when you see him, send him that message, let him know he's already healed. My sister broke down into tears, man, drove to the hospital and came and told me. At that moment, I knew. I was like,
this is the second time in the same week.
And truly random
people, random situations. And I was like, okay, I'm good. After that, bro, I'm trying to tell you, it was stuff like that was happening that I was like, there's no way I could, it was like, okay. So at that moment, there was a peace that came when you're in the situation and you're seeing yourself decline. And yeah, man, it was stuff like that happened. And then the third time, final time, was the pastors of my mom's church came and prayed for me. And the wife of the pastor, Pastor Torian and Pastor Nova, came and prayed, and they were both going in, man. I mean, that prayer was so deep that I think everybody in the whole ICU got saved. Like it was intense, man. Yeah. And I was just like, okay. And, and then she had a prophetic word that came, and she said, there's something she stopped. She said, she kept asking me, was there something that you bought in Hawaii or bought that someone gave you? Sometimes we get gifts or things that, sometimes they have things on them. And I was like, nah, man, I don't, people don't really give me anything. And so she was like, okay. And so it was a prophetic moment. The God had showed her something that I had that I needed to get rid of. And somehow I don't know, it was crazy, man. And yeah, so all these things were happening. But the thing for me was the lady and my sister in the salt bath. And I was just like, I was like, I don't know. After that, I was like, okay, everything's going to be good.
So basically, she had a dream, and all that stuff was revealed to her.
All that stuff was in that moment, 45 minutes. Now, my sister did not know this lady, never met her, older lady, and she woke up. She said, hey, your brother's going to be good. Make sure you let him know that. Everything's fine. Tell him don't worry about anything. It's just all going to pass away. And literally how she said it was actually how it happened.
It's kind of like I feel like you get these messages, right?
Yeah.
Maybe if you had teams of doctors telling you are going to need a heart transplant. And
yeah, and this was going on for a year. So it was like for a year straight, I was being told, hey man, this is really bad. You can die in your sleep. So every time I'd go to sleep, I was, it's like you're like in your mind, there's a possibility I'm not going to wake up because, you're being told this. So you're rehearsing it in your, in your mind. Not only that, but my wife, man, I mean, like she was not sleeping because she was checking on me to see if I was still breathing. Man. And so it was a lot of that for a year, and we had a 1-year-old. So you had my baby, in bed with us, and my wife waking up, check on the baby. She wasn't getting no sleep, man. And then she'd go to work, and it was crazy. And so, yeah, I was being told I was basically going to die.
Right.
For over a year, that it wasn't bad. It's not going to get better. There's nothing you can do. It's just like you're being this is what you're rehearsing. And I just believe God was like, okay, it's time to send him some messages that I need him to hear. And so there were all these moments where it was like, okay. And the final one was when the pastors came to pray for me. My mom's pastors came, they prayed. And he told me that before he left his house, he asked God, what do you want me to tell, what do you have for me to tell him? Because he woke up that morning thinking about me. He called my mom and said, hey, how's your son doing? He's like, he's not doing well. He's in the ICU. He's like, what? He's like, man, I woke up this morning. First thing was like, what's going on with JoJo? So he called and said, hey, man, I'm coming down. We're coming to see you. Came down, and on his way there, he said, Lord, what do you have for me to tell him? And the very thing he said was, God told me to tell you, just rest. Go to sleep. I was like, what? He's like, just go to sleep, man. He's like, don't worry about anything. Just go to bed. And that was the word. And I was like, okay. And it made sense because this lady had already told my sister.
Right.
Told my sister, hey, man, your brother's going to be good. Tell him just chill. He comes in and says, hey, man, just go to bed. For 1 month, I slept like I never slept. I mean, I had no distractions. They brought me breakfast. I mean, it was like I was just on vacation or something. I was watching football. Me and my dad were coming out. We're having like Monday night football, Thursday night football. We were watching Sunday football. I mean, like, yeah, it was that for a month.
Isn't that interesting? You said the third one.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting how the saying things will come in threes, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting?
Yep. And it got confirmed.
Right.
And now I wanted to say I interrupted you a little bit back there, but I was going to say, now, if you were someone that wasn't a faith, you might have disregarded, oh, those people are crazy, right? Like, I need to listen to these doctors.
Right.
I'm not saying to not listen to doctors, but sometimes you're getting such strong messages that, the alternative they were giving you was not good. The heart transplant was not good. And so what I'm saying is that, that's sometimes, faith can be important in the sense where you were actually receiving these messages and you're willing to act on them. And that's what faith is, rather than that's what I think that faith is being open and listening. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that ultimately, if you think about it, that's what saved your life, really.
Yeah. It's very important to have discernment.
Yeah.
To like really be able to, it's important to have discernment, but it's also important to exercise discernment when everything is being thrown at you. And it's like, you have your natural ears. Then you have there's an inner ear, your heart.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Absolutely.
the very thing that God speaks to you out of was the very thing they were trying to take from me. You see what I'm saying? And so it was like, that's what didn't make sense. It's like, it kept rehearsing in me in the hospital where I was thinking like, okay, they want to take my heart. It's like, first thing you think is, where does God reside in our lives? It's like, we always keep God's close. He's in our heart, right? He's speaking to us. He's in our soul, right? One of the things I learned when they take your heart, like you hear these stories of people, they get heart transplants and, they're not just taking on that person's heart, but they're taking on their spirit. Like, it's deeper than that, man.
Right.
You're not just, putting some, it's not as simple as it is, it's deeper than that. And I couldn't come to terms with the fact that they were taking my heart. It was like, you're taking the place where the Lord lives.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? And you're going to put another heart in. I don't know that person, I don't know I don't know what's going on there. But you're going to put this inside of me and I'm just supposed to, nah, man, I was not okay with that. And I got to a place where I was like, Lord, you know what it is, man. This is not, first of all, I got a lot to do, and second, if it is my time to go, I'd rather go hang with you than be in this place where I'm walking around with some guy's heart I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, nah, man. And I got to ask you to come into this house. I don't know. It wasn't adding up, man. So, I think discernment is very important. Being able to hear the voice of God, like,
right.
And it's, it's not as spooky as, some people make it like, oh, God's talking to me all the time. That may be the case, but sometimes he can be sending people your way.
Absolutely.
To kind of give you what you need.
And what I love about your story is that you weren't necessarily looking for or expecting these words, right?
No.
God chose to speak to you in that way at that time because he knew what you needed.
Yeah.
And isn't that like God, right? Like to kind of do things how we wouldn't expect, or, he's not that genie in a bottle, right? Like, when we're looking for it, he's often going to be silent, probably.
Yeah.
But he knows what we need when we need it.
Yeah.
And sometimes if we do seek him and we need, wisdom or whatever it is, a word, he'll give it to us, right? In the right time, through the right means or whatever. but it's pretty cool when you're not even expecting it.
Yeah.
It happens 3 times in a week, and then it's almost confirming that way. Like, gosh, how else can you explain that?
Yeah.
Now,
Very much so.
How do you answer? So, like, for people that might be like, well, how do you answer, children that are suffering if God is in control, right? Like, how do you, as someone of faith, either one of you, how do you answer that question? Because sometimes things don't work out, in a miracle, almost like what it did with you. Like, how would you respond to that? I kind of want both of you.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because that's typically the rebuttal to saying, "Oh, that's great," but
people ask.
But what about the other suffering people in the world?
Yeah,
exactly.
People ask that all the time. The thing is the Bible never teaches that we're not going to suffer. It actually teaches the complete opposite. Mm-hmm. It teaches that suffering is a part of the process. It's a part of our life and what we're going to experience. Once you come to that, get over that hump. Which okay, in my mind, one of the things that was asked to me during that process was, one of the pastors was like, "Hey man, how are you?" And I'm, naturally like, "Oh, I'm cool, man. I'm doing okay." And he's like, No, I'm not asking how you feel. I'm asking how are you in your heart and in your spirit? Where are you with God? And I said, "Oh, bro, it's not good." And he said, "Okay." He said, Can you tell me more?" And I said, "Yeah." I was like, "I don't feel like the Lord is with me." Because you're in that season where you're suffering so much and you're crying out to God, "God, help me, help
Basically,
me, help
you're
me."
Job.
Right. Yeah, everything's falling apart around you. And you're like, "God, help me."
God's up there gambling with the devil to see if this guy will...
It's complete silence. And I don't ever remember a season like that where it's, you may have some time where you're like, "Lord, I need some direction on what I'm supposed to do here, or where I'm supposed to go, or if this is the right person I'm supposed to marry." All these different things that you go to God for, right? And eventually you get an answer. It's not going to take a year and a half. You know what I'm saying? But you get an answer. I wasn't getting anything, bro. I mean, it was ghost town. It was like he just took his hands off your boy.
That is the purpose of that story, I think. Yeah. The story of Job, where he makes a bet with the devil. Will he remain faithful through all this? I think that is the purpose of that story. Yeah. I think the what that equals is patience. Yeah. And that's how I take that, because it really is a terrible story. If you think it's like, what is wrong with God if he's making bets, to see this guy, like, it seems so trivial for this guy to suffer. But I think that is the real meaning of that. I think that I think going back to your question, if you can get over get past the idea that, okay, we're supposed to suffer, which, I had to go through this whole process in my mind. It was like, okay, this is a part of the situation. I think there's other questions that could be asked too. For example, you said, well, this person's suffering and maybe they don't end up the same way, right? I think a lot of times we overlook certain questions, like maybe they died or whatever, and, it didn't work out the way that we prayed for it to work out. But did we ever consider what they wanted? You know what I mean? Like, because you have to understand, the person suffering, if we don't ask them what they want, they're not always going to communicate, "Hey, I want to live. I want to do this. I want to do that." Sometimes they could not communicate that at all. And on the inside, they're like, "I want to go be with the Lord because I feel like this is a better place to be." You know what I'm saying? Because that's what the scriptures teach us, is that when we get with God, it's greater than what we're going to experience here on earth. And then sometimes we also have to consider that God's will, what is the Lord's will for each or one of our lives? We know God knows that us being with him is going to be better than where we here on earth. But I think that there's so many things to consider, like to say that it didn't work out. In God's eyes, it did work out. Whether I would have been here with my family or if I would have passed away, God would have got the glory regardless of the situation. I think that all those things need to be considered before we just make a broad statement and say, well, what about my son who died and didn't, it didn't work out the way you prayed for it to work out, but I think the idea of mercy is the fact that you are eternal and that this is almost like, this is a blip in time, right? The mercy is that, this might be a terrible experience, but you are an eternal soul. That's
sure.
where the mercy comes in, right? Like, it's not like you're so much your experience here. It's almost like sometimes life feels like a video game, but but
What do you think?
yeah,
Yeah, well, I like the scripture that came to mind when he said that right there was, I think it's from 1 Peter, where he says, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer trials, right? And so it's really, I think that key phrase is a little while.
A little while.
I mean, this, like you said, this is a blip, right? And Francis Chan talks a lot about that too, right? Like he has an analogy with a big old rope, and he's like, this is your life right here, this much of the rope, and this is eternity. Well, I don't want to act like, oh, well, it's okay that there's a ton of suffering people in the world, including, kids and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Because we're going to live there for a little bit, and then everybody is going to live in eternity. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Not saying that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I think we need to recognize that if God is love, if we truly believe that God is love, then we have to recognize that the only way for him to exercise a real relationship of love with his children, us, is by giving us freedom. If we were robots, there's no love there, right?
Sure.
If he just, orchestrated everything and everything's perfect and everybody's in paradise forever, there's no love relationship there, right? So he gave us freedom because of that and the fall. Then there are natural consequences to that in the world. And as much as God loves us, he has to give us that freedom, right?
Yeah.
So due to the natural consequences, we're going to see suffering in the world. We're going to see terrible things. We're going to see the Adolf Hitlers or whatever.
Yeah.
But getting back to God's plan, I mean, if we read scripture, he has a master plan of redemption.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to trust in that too. And even though in our minds, we don't completely understand why God would allow like kids to get caught up in sex trafficking or whatever, we have to trust that he does have a master plan. He is going to redeem all things. And if he is a God of love, then he has to give us that freedom, right?
Yeah.
And so then it's kind of like, how do we respond? If we do see suffering in the world, gosh, we have an opportunity to be his hands and his feet and to bring his love and his truth into these different contexts.
Yeah.
That's why I think what you're doing is so great. It's like there are terrible things that go on in the world, and it's almost like we have if you are lucky enough to have it so great, you almost have an obligation to do something, right?
For sure.
And absolutely,
that's what's you're the company that you're the director of. It is you guys focus on the trafficking and the mission work, and how is it divvied up? Like, how much of the percentage of your time is focused on? You said how many? 4 pillars?
Yeah, 4 pillars. So we actually focus on 1 pillar per quarter.
Oh, I understand.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, and then mission trips are kind of scattered throughout the year, and
I understand.
We may be doing a mission trip that's associated with at-risk youth in any given quarter.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like our fundraising efforts and that kind of thing, we kind of divvy them up at quarter.
I understand. Okay.
Do you have anything you'd like to talk about pertaining to sex trafficking? I always find that very interesting.
Sure. So that's the first quarter of the year is what we focus on.
Oh, cool.
And it falls in line with, I think there's a sex trafficking month is at the beginning of the year, might be January of every year. We support an organization called Atlas Free.
Okay.
And they're doing work in a lot of different countries all over the world. And they're doing actually a lot of work outside of what you would normally think of when you think of sex trafficking. A lot of people think of raids, we're going to go in and rescue people and get them out. They do a lot of actually preventative work and proactive work.
Okay.
So as an example, they work with governments in a lot of these countries to bring harsher punishments on those caught in sex trafficking. Because that's a big problem. It's they get a little slap on the wrist and then it's back out. So there's no real consequences. So they're looking to implement, much harsher consequences. They're also, like, for instance, in Mexico, Tijuana, there was a red light district where a lot of kids who are bound to get kind of caught up in the whole cycle of sex trafficking and that whole lifestyle. These kids were literally like running the streets at like 2 a.m, elementary age kids and younger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just really bad. And Atlas Free found a way to build basically a school for a lot of these kids complete with like a amazing playground and petting zoo. And it's not just about the school. It's about almost a therapeutic type of environment, for these kids. And they're well fed. They get a great education. And so they're going to be on their way to getting out of that cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not normally the type of stuff you think about, in terms of fighting sex trafficking. But those are some of the efforts that Alice Free is putting forth, in addition to a lot of rehab work with victims who are now out of that.
Yeah, because a lot of these kids will end up getting out of it, and they have major PTSD, and they resort to drugs, and then their testimonies are not taken seriously because they are considered to, this person's addicted to so and so drug, and so it's a vicious cycle for sure.
Yeah,
and
so that's one of the things that Alice Free is doing in many different countries, is working with victims, and it's very comprehensive. The work that they do in long term, with these victims, to get them back on track and away from addiction and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Man. So these, have you been on any, like, what's the craziest mission trip that you've ever been on? Or like, are there any wild stories of like fighting off, snakes or anything?
Man. No, I've only been on 2. So I don't have any crazy stories. I will say that going to Nicaragua was, a bit of a stretch, just in terms of the weather and the conditions and the.
Oh yeah.
It's funny, just perspective wise. And I can tell you stories that other people have told me too, but perspective wise, it's like you go down there, and we had some translators who were kind of young guys, like in their mid-20s, and we had fun. They were good dudes, and they were saying that, man, if you have a motorcycle, basically like a motorbike, you can get a girl like that, right? But they said if you have, and then they said if you have a car, you get any girl you want.
Really?
If you own a car,
that's all you need is a motorcycle.
That's what passport bros are.
Oh yeah. That's I heard about them.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was just kind of like, wow, man. There's not a lot of running water, where we were. So in Nicaragua, the city is Ocotal. So there's the capital you fly into, Managua, and then it's about a 5-hour drive to Ocotal. So, not a lot of running water. They just have like big bins of water that people use for their cooking, for their bathing, for, you just kind of grab some water from, take a bowl and dump it over your head and that sort of thing. That's your bathing, and just different lifestyle, man.
You're so lucky to be in the United States.
We take a lot of things for granted.
Absolutely, man.
I've always said this. I mean, just flushing toilet paper down the toilet. Like, that's like, you go to Mexico, you can't even do that.
Exactly. No, same in Nicaragua, for sure. And then I just recently had a podcast with Hillary Froning, which is Rich Froning, the Michael Jordan of CrossFit, his wife, right? And she went to her first mission trip. She's on the Mayhem Mission board, by the way. Her first mission trip was to Malawi, Africa in March.
Okay.
And man, she was telling me stories about how, first of all, they went to like a local school just to feed some of the kids. And word got around, and parents were coming from left and right just to drop off their kid to get a meal, because that may be the only meal they had, and who knows how long.
Yeah.
And the parents, they couldn't get the meal, but they at least wanted their child to have a meal. And then when they had dishes that they were bringing up to wash, these kids were fighting over the dirty dishes just to see if they could get some scraps of food off of the dirty dishes.
What's going on in these countries that, my question is if we can solve these problems by going there and setting up water and doing all this stuff, what's going on in the countries or these places that they're not able to provide that? It's obviously able to be done. Is it the leadership? Is it the just simply the knowledge? Or, I mean, like, what is it?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it is at the government level. There's corruption.
Okay.
There's a couple from Tennessee who opened an orphanage in Malawi. That's the mission trip that, Mayhem Mission participates in. They go there at least once or twice a year. In fact, Hillary, who went in March, is going back in October. And I think a group just got back this past month in July. Okay. So they might even go multiple times a year. But there's a couple, Kelsey and Nelia Canfield, who they adopted a child from Malawi. And then they were in the process of adopting another one, and they saw this just massive need for these kids that often get abandoned, or, I mean, there's terrible stories.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is there a stay after group that monitors? Because I know that orphanages can also be a trafficking hub if it's not monitored in a way like it. Look at what happened in Haiti. All these displaced kids after the earthquake.
Yeah.
You have people getting trafficked because they set up these orphanages, and they're just like, it's a
took it
target
over.
for sex trafficking. So
that's a great point. And I think the Canfields have been very intentional about who they're hiring to run it.
Okay.
The local contacts, and making sure everything is protected. In fact, they just opened another location where they have a wall surrounding, because if there's albino kids, there's some sort of stigma with the albino kids where their lives are extremely in danger.
Oh, wow.
And they get taken for any number of reasons, witchcraft, that sort of stuff. Yeah. So they had to be very cautious about it. So I know they're taking all the measures they can to protect the kids, have the right staff, be in touch with the local government officials and stuff like that locally where they are there. We just raised a bunch of money for a village in Ethiopia so that they could have a clean water project through an organization called Never Thirst that we support. And I can't tell you the reason that village doesn't have clean water is because of government corruption.
Yeah.
It might just be, a lack of access due to it's just circumstantial. But I do know that it's really cool when you can go in and provide clean water for different communities, because it all ties together. Like when people have to travel a few miles or several miles every day just to get clean water, that's where a lot of sex trafficking happens, right?
Oh, very true.
Like women or children that get snagged, and so it actually prevents
That's amazing.
sex trafficking when you provide clean water. Not only are they getting what they need physically, but it's a protective measure.
And do you find that they're able to sustain it, that they're able to manage the facilities that are providing clean water, or after you put them in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe Never Thirst is very intentional about setting up systems and even revisiting.
Okay, that's okay.
Revisiting and making sure that, things are kosher, and it's not just a one and done.
Yeah,
I got you. That's really good
cool.
to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do to fundraise for these organizations?
Yeah, so I mentioned that each quarter, we're going to have a focus. So the first quarter, at the end of March every year, at CrossFit Mayhem, we do a workout, and we call it Mayhem for Freedom. And we invite a lot of other CrossFit gyms to join us. So several gyms participate at their own facilities. And then CrossFit Mayhem has a big facility in Cookeville, Tennessee, where we have a lot of people. And we do this workout. So the fundraising aspect comes where you can register for the workout, and there's a fee associated with that. You can buy a shirt. That also helps raise money. And then you can raise money above and beyond the registration costs as well through a giving platform that we use. So it's using fitness, we say, do what you love to fight what you hate.
Yeah, that's dope, man.
I love it. And where can people, where can they support? So give us your website, give us your socials if you're on, anything, X, Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely.
How can we follow you?
Yeah, Mayhem Mission, www.mayhemmission.org. That has a lot of the events that I've been referring to, mission trips, info there, and how you can sign up for those.
Cool.
We have something called the Pray Project that we've initiated, which is kind of fun. Every Wednesday at 12 Eastern, we're just asking people to pray, in the faith and fitness world, and we post a verse on Instagram every week to kind of guide the prayers and what we're praying about. Cool. So that's pretty cool, too. We have the concept of Mayhem Mission chapters, where different gyms can kind of, come on board and support what we're doing. And so every month we have a call at that time where we get to pray together on a Zoom call. So on Instagram, it's just at Mayhem Missions. Mayhem Mission was taken, so we had to at Mayhem Missions. People often get confused, and they call us Mayhem Missions, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Mayhem Mission, close enough, right?
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Man, well, thank you so much for chatting with us, telling us about your organization and all the great stuff that you're doing. And that's it.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. This has been great.
Yeah,
thanks guys.